it says continue. Continue means I accept it.
There you go. So hi.
Hello, Heather. Nice to see you again.
It is nice to see you again too. So to start off with, would you like to just say your name, where you are?
So my name's Jacqueline Hilton. I am in my lovely home in East Gosford, which is about 80 kilometres north of Sydney, Australia. Despite the background looking a bit Japanese, I am half Japanese inside, but I am in Australia.
Okay. Well, yes, since I met you in Mexico, it's all confusing anyhow. So it kind of feels like I don't know where we are, but it's nice to meet you.
And isn't that lovely that we can meet? Doesn't matter where we are.
Yeah, it is. So the first question for this project is, who are you? Who are you as a person? What are some of your passions, your interests, qualities, values? What is it that makes you who you are as a human being?
It's such an interesting question. As I just made that comment about being a little bit Japanese or half Japanese inside, I'm really aware. I went to Japan when I was 17 as an exchange student, a little girl straight out of boarding school, very unaware of the world in some ways, and spent a year living with Japanese families, going to high school. And that has changed me in so many ways. And so that's a really big part of me. Where I am in myself now, the biggest word, it is a big word, embodiment. You know, my wish to grow and be more of me and more in me is a really important part of my life. It's the important part, most important, growth and learning to accept and be more in my body, in my journey, in myself. Values. Well, authenticity is a big value. Being real. And of course, also learning when and how to bring that that was a big lesson of my Gestalt training. Because I'm thinking I'm meant to be authentic, but what does that mean? Anyway, learning to enjoy all the different parts that are me. That sounds nice.
Sounds Gestalt.
Yeah.
Do you have any other particular interests or qualities or passions?
So as I've grown older, the spiritual, transpersonal side of life has become more and more important to me in ways that have been a bit surprising. So, a meditation or a prayer practice, walking, connecting with nature, and having quiet time, that's really important to me. And I also practice and teach yoga in a very different kind of, I call it more, it's therapeutic yoga. So it's very gentle, very accepting. And that's, so important. Yoga. And I have Alexander technique lessons, and it's all that part of how am I in the world? How do I move? The word mindfulness is pretty overused a bit at the moment. And that's, I'd like to say consciousness, awareness, to be aware of how I am and how I move and how I interact. A lot of the time is the kind of goal, I think, moving towards.
Okay. Well, another question that we have is, since we're relational beings, I'm wondering who comes to mind when I ask who has had the most impact on who you are as a person and how?
Most impact. It's really interesting. I guess my mind goes to two things. Again, early years, mother and father, divorce, separation, abandonment, feeling abandoned as I would say we, because I mean, it's quite common, of course, for children to feel it's their fault that, that there were problems in the home. So that was a really big part of my life. But I spent a long time pretending or believing that didn't impact me until times came for my mother's illness and dying and my own marriage breaking up. And I'm like, was very lucky to meet a wonderful yoga teacher and a wonderful Gestalt trained therapist. And I began the journey of learning, well, who am I then? And what does all this mean? And I'm very grateful for all of that. I know it sounds cliche, but I'm quite pleased to say that's how I feel at this moment. It might change, and it probably will. But that's how I am at the moment.
So you said earlier, is there someone else who came to mind as well, who has also had an impact on you, or?
No, it was the first one that came to mind. He was my counselor and therapist, then became my supervisor for a long time. And that first experience of being listened to, of being accepted, acknowledged, validated. I didn't know that I didn't have that until I, began that journey, in counselling. And he was trained in lots of different modalities, Gestalt in the really early 70s and 80s, energy work, transpersonal, hypnosis, all sorts of different things. But we just, body work, he did a lot of somatic work, and that acceptance, validation. I'd never had that, and so grateful, very powerful.
Okay, well, another question that we have is, and maybe it's something that you've already mentioned, I'm not sure, is what event or circumstance would you say has shaped who you are?
Then I did just, refer to that. It's now 15 years, and I was living in Thailand at the time. I was married to a Thai man with whom I spoke Japanese, because we met in Japan. So plus there were 2 dialects. We were speaking about 4 different languages in the home. I was working 2 jobs, had 2 small children, and my mum was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that brought up a lot of stuff, as it would. So although I remember saying I can't handle all this, everything, came to a head, and I ended up leaving my husband and coming back, not planning to, but back in Australia with 2 small children, my mum dying. So that was a big awakening. It was a very hard time. And that's when, as I said, I found yoga, and I found a great Gestalt therapist, and began the journey of working through, or finding out who I was, and surviving. The first couple of years was just surviving. And with 2 very interesting now adult young men as my sons, very different. That ongoing journey of being a mother and then trying to be me as I've grown, and what all that means. Letting go. And then they come back, though, but anyway.
Well, how is it that you came to Gestalt more directly or more deeply after that initial encounter with that therapist?
Well, I worked with him for a solid 6 years or so, a long time. And what really interested my children at that point, I'd put them into a Steiner school, which was very different from mainstream schooling and open to lots of different ideas. And I think it was my son's teacher was doing training in Gestalt. And I heard about it and thought, well, I'll just do 1 year just for my own personal growth. Oh, you look as if you've heard that before, have you?
Well, I mean, that's what they all say. Just one more and then I'll leave. And this will be the last one. And yeah, right.
Well, I guess it was 1 year for personal growth. And then once I started, I was like, this is my language. I felt that really, really deeply. And I had toyed with the idea of studying psychology, going to university. And to me, that was just so limiting, just addressing the head alone, not the rest of me. And Gestalt, you know, has so many tools, so many different ways of opening all that. So after the first year, and of course, well, I don't know how it is in your training, but I guess we've had this idea, first year is very confluent and all, isn't this wonderful? Don't we all love each other? And isn't this great? And then things changed a lot in the second year. However, once I made a decision, yes, this is something I want to do, I was going to see it through to the end, come what may. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, it's the confluence, and then it's the working through differences kind of stage. Yeah.
Yes, it can become very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what is it that attracted or attracts you most within Gestalt?
What comes to my mind is you said, I love this, I'm going to misquote it, something that I believe that, oh my goodness, that Laura Pearl said, something about each Gestalt, there's a new Gestalt therapy, or each Gestalt therapist creates their own Gestalt therapy. So there's something about that which is really appealing and feels very real and true. It's not about me learning a set pattern. It's about me evolving and growing on an ongoing basis, not just through my years of training, but always, and developing myself and my own unique Gestalt therapy. And that creativity and also I really enjoyed, once I really got into it, the theoretical background. Because as I'd grown through my life, I was at one point a very academic, very word person and had no idea where my body was. And through a different couple of things that happened, there was dance in my 30s and then yoga late 30s, 40s. And then being introduced to different authentic movement practices which brought movement and therapy together. And with all of that, you know, learning to trust my body and be my body was around big focus. And particularly when I did my master's degree in Gestalt, it's like, yeah, but I don't have to leave the body to have the theory. You know, Gestalt has it both. And learning to, you know, like that dance between, I've got the theoretical framework, I've got the background, all that stuff, which I love. And I just gently put all that aside and use the other aspects of myself and being in the moment. And yeah, I love that. It's a Gestalt, isn't it? Complete.
You should call it that.
We do.
Yeah. Okay, so how would you say that Gestalt has affected you as a person?
Well, a great deal. I think, you know, already my comments have shown that. I see it. I bought a book about Gestalt as a way of life. I can't remember the author, but I gave it to somebody. Okay. I need to buy myself another copy. the idea of it's a way of living, of being in the world, of being in myself, of learning and growing and interacting in all my relationships, not just a therapeutic encounter. That's really important to me. It's a way, it's a way of living, a way of being in the world, and brings such rich connections. As I was going for my walk this morning, and my mind was just floating back to, thinking of doing the interview in different moments in my, experiences of Gestalt. And there's such richness of connection and, presence with people from different countries, different places, different moments that are so, rich is the only word I've got. So, and nourishing and real. That's very appealing. I notice that answered the question. How's it changed me? I'm pretty much unrecognizable from what I was 15 years ago. I would say unrecognizable, yeah. Literally, I was assisting at a yoga class somewhere, and somebody who knew me when I'd first come back to Australia was at the school where my children were. I literally didn't recognize me.
I think that's a compliment. I mean, I didn't know the old you, but I mean, renovation is nice.
It's good, and it's ongoing. It's ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But that, more aliveness. That's, especially not just being as a therapist as myself, but undergoing those years of therapy. Brought me back to life. Well, not back to life, to life. All that energy that had been shut down and in different experiences. So completely different world and way beforehand. I remember even one of my first, this idea of obligations and weighing up the balance of things, and just my whole worldview completely different and changing. That's another thing I like in Gestalt. It's always changing, as we are.
You can't even do the same interview twice, right?
Yeah. See, that's what I'd like to say when I met that quote about Laura Pearl's. What I come to is also each session is a unique Gestalt. Each session, there's a new, we together co-create a Gestalt therapy for this moment in time, here and now, for this 1 hour. And it's different, and it's never the same again. That's amazing. That's very special. And honouring the uniqueness in everybody and each connection. And that brings me, there's a couple of wonderful Japanese expressions about valuing the moment, being in the moment. So sort of like old Japanese philosophical things, which to me just really relate to Gestalt and to the relationality. Got a couple of the expressions. Yeah, I was meant to be in Japan this week running workshops, and so that's quite figural in my mind.
Yeah, so part of you might be there actually right now.
And I have been, having a couple of Zoom conversations. So it's some wonderful expressions on relationality, which is really interesting because my Japanese colleagues are very much, in my experience, and I could be completely wrong, there's more of a tendency to really like the Fritz Perl stuff and the Gestalt prayer.
I've seen Japanese delegations with the T-shirt, literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And with the cloud of smoke of Fritz Perls, and I looked at that and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit old Gestalt, maybe, if I could say that. But that idea of not having to worry about everybody else is really appealing. And I know when I first heard that, the prayer myself, is it a prayer? The Gestalt, it's called the Gestalt prayer, isn't it?
It gets called, yeah.
Yeah. When I first came across it, it was a big relief. so much of the way I had, grown up to look after everybody else. Everybody else's needs come first. I come last if ever. And so in the beginning, that was really refreshing that, okay, I can say no. I can say no to somebody. That was revolutionary. And I find in myself, as I've grown and we've, studied different, the evolution of thought and therapy, and the current emphasis now on, the dialogue, the relationship, is so important, not just in Gestalt, but important to the world. And I've had, different discussions in Japan, because the idea of the relationship between the therapist and the client, because being a more more structured society, that the therapist is up here and the client's down here. I said, well, that was what it's like in my culture too, with doctors, not as rigid perhaps, but this idea of, being equal and being in a relationship was just a couple of steps too far. That's my impression from some of my colleagues. And I remember I did a presentation in Tokyo in 2015, introducing this idea that there's the, individualism, and that model, the American, model is 70s, 80s. And then the collectivism of Japan and other high context cultures, where the self is completely undervalued, in my experience, and what I was presenting was that, Japanese culture is very relational, and a lot of your general expressions actually totally embody this idea of a relational Gestalt. What's important is somehow to be able to have the relationships without losing all sense of self.
It's not either or.
It's not either or. It's in between. And there are times when you do put your own needs aside for someone else. And that's okay, as long as you know that that's what you're doing. This is my own, ideas. As long as I know what I'm doing and I've not gone back to all these default habits, because once you do that, of course, resentment and manipulation and guilting people and all that kind of stuff, comes up. And the idea of what obligations and duty and all that. So to be able to relate to each other with a sense of who I am and boundaries opens me up to a deeper connection through the relationships. So I like to think of Gestalt dialogical, relational I, thou, and all that as the way forward, the place in between this idea of, collectivism and individualism. So such opposite polarities, that the modality of Gestalt, or as a way of life, or of learning to interact and value difference in the other, could possibly be a type of middle ground where there's potential for more connection. And because I do a lot of my Gestalt work in Japan in Japanese, so the idea of different language and culture, and then going to Mexico, that was so interesting to just be in different aspects, be with Gestalt people in a different way. That's really interesting. I think in the Gestalt way of thinking, way of life, way of being, has enormous potential to connect across cultures, because valuing the other and endeavouring to step into the shoes and be in the shoes of the other, as much as is possible, and moving back and forth between that, is a wonderful way of communicating and getting through difficulties. Has enormous potential, I think, for communication across all sorts of cultural issues that are all around the world now. I got a bit bigger than the question, I think. Anyway.
No, there's stuff that I always love talking with other interpreters because it's really amazing. I mean, I didn't have Gestalt language in English, which was my native language, because I did my training in Spanish. And then I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know how to express this in what was my native language. And so when I watch you doing the shifts into Japanese, which I imagine, I don't really know, is even a larger cultural jump, it's a really interesting process. And I admire the people who have that skill set, because it's not just language. It's introducing and sharing concepts that sometimes are very, very new. So
they are. I remember when I was interpreting for the Japanese people in Mexico, someone was saying how it takes so many more words in Japanese. And I'm like, oh, but the concepts are so foreign in the language. And it's also, I did my Gestalt training in English. So I've done some in Japanese, but there's probably a lot of vocabulary that I was missing. However, the concepts in some ways, and even when, I reflect in English when I did my training, our debate and discussion around the meanings of words were long and involved. And you want me to give just one word? For example, there's one of the things like vulnerability. And it's a huge concept, and shame. They're just two words that came to that we talked about for hours and hours in our training. And they are different, particularly shame is used in our therapeutic world in a different way from mainstream. And so, I can't just put one word on that in Japanese. This I found in expressing, so I much prefer, actually, rather than interpreting, I prefer doing Gestalt therapy in Japanese.
Okay.
I actually much prefer that myself. And in the Japanese language, the words that relate to the body and emotions and sensations in the body, just really incredibly expressive language. So there's this one word, ki, which is, it's spirit. It's the same, it's chi in the Chinese qigong and all that. And using that word, there's hundreds of different ways. Like one thing, ki o tsukao, I use my ki too much in this relationship. Not too much, I use it in this relationship. How, and then it's like, how much do you use? And it depletes it. I love diving into the language like that. And kind of, it's very convenient to stir Japanese people up who've used the expressions, for years and years. Like there's one, yamai wa kikara, that illness comes from the spirit, comes from your emotional world. And that's in the language. But to stop and think, oh, maybe this is why I need Gestalt therapy, because this, it's impacting my health and my body, all those things. And it's there in the language. Which, I find really interesting. The other thing is, I think I found learning another language and embodying, not completely, of course, I still look, I'm not Japanese, but when I was, even 2 years ago on a trip, after I did my training, I spent time with my Japanese host mother and Japanese sister from, 30 years previous. And we're walking around chatting, and I kind of get surprised when someone addresses me in English, because, we're just there in our space, and I get surprised. Oh, that's right. I look really different from everybody else. And I'm so comfortable.
It's the cultural dysphoria. Your body doesn't match your culture.
And I also really find that, reflecting now, that whole process has helped me so much as a therapist. This idea of stepping out of your own culture and your own way of being, to endeavor to, as much as possible, take on that of another, and from a place of respect and curiosity. that's incredible learning and incredibly valuable for us as therapists. So I've got this little thing in the back of my mind when I was doing my master's and reading certain people's works, noting that people who are multilingual or bilingual and working across cultures and languages, there's just a different sense of the purity of Gestalt in that. That might sound a bit funny. I can't quite, I'll just come back to my experience learning Japanese, and there was a lot, I did lose myself in lots of ways at that time, and have come back to accepting and growing in different ways. But it's different aspects of self are discovered through different languages and different interactions. And there's something really immensely valuable, because we all are cultures. Each person carries their own culture with them. So having experience to really quite deep degrees for me in living in Japan and then living in Thailand, although I still was speaking Japanese and speaking English and two different dialects of Thai, being, in that different place, you absorb the culture and the mores and the yes and the no and all those kind of things. So I find, the Gestalt writings on like Talia and the book Bridges, that really resonated with me. I just find it so fascinating. Gestalt across culture. I think there's so much potential for good there.
Well, and this might actually be the next question, which is whether you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community. Does that phrase mean anything to you?
Interesting. One of the things I do reflect about myself often, feeling a little bit on the outside of things, which can also be a valuable place to be, because you can have a different perspective. I really enjoy my time in Japan and have spent this year is going to be the first year in maybe 5-6 years that I haven't been to Japan and run Gestalt workshops. So there's quite a gap there, and not interacting with people there. Sorry, I've lost. What were you asking again?
Whether you feel part of a Gestalt community.
Yeah.
I'm guessing because you miss it, that probably yes.
There is definitely a feeling of being there. And I also do have this idea, and then through, connecting with you and being to Toronto AAGT, and again, we're not having that this year, I have a yearning to connect more with Gestalt people. Around me here, my colleagues and fellow therapists, 1 or 2 people had a big Gestalt training, but sadly it was quite traumatic for both of those people. So they're not really, going way back, 20 years ago. So they're not really considering themselves Gestalt or want to talk about it in any favourable way. So yeah, there's a part of me that wants more of that. Talking about Gestalt, connecting with a wider Gestalt community.
And this is maybe jumping back a little bit more of a personal question, but it's also, I guess, a cultural question, which is how you live or experience your gendered self or yourself as a woman, and what relation Gestalt has with that.
So that's interesting. Sadly, one of the first things that comes to my mind is the, I guess, the incidence of inappropriate behaviour by trainers and therapists that I've read about and experienced over the years. And you know, that is a part, and it's in lots of different areas, lots of different traditions, but it's definitely in a part of the Gestalt world. So for me, that you know, being seen as a woman and then, you know, experience inappropriate advances from male trainers, and once you look at that, you know, it's a big part of unspoken Gestalt history, shall we say. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, which is sad, and it's real, and it's not just in Gestalt, it's everywhere. It was everywhere, and I'd like to say that. Yeah. So that was my first thing. Another part, as a woman, to me, it's like a Gestalt and working as a therapist maybe has, in a way, given me permission to be myself, aside from the role of mother, wife, partner. That's what it means to me. So still, and my experience in sort of, you know, regular society, there's still that pressure for a woman to, you know, be valued. And this, not just from women, but in their association with a partner or, you know, a husband or being a mother, and to be myself aside from any of those roles. So that's what I feel Gestalt has given me an opportunity to grow into and continue to do so. I know there was always very few men in trainings. I'm just thinking of moments and how touching it was to see, you know, as fellow students, you know, men willing to be vulnerable in that safe place was very touching. And there's not many safe places, I think, for men to be that vulnerable.
And that, I think, in some ways, I'm speaking for myself, has let me meet men in different ways in those settings that, like you say, you wouldn't find them out in the wild, but it's a place that allows different things to happen. I'm sorry to cut in, but
this is, you know, it is. I know that the first time, and I had a wonderful experience with, I had a huge process in my training come up in where I was absolutely, I couldn't breathe, and something just came over me, and I was just, you know, couldn't breathe. And the care and willingness to step with me into that pain and work through that. There were two trainers that supported me. That was amazing. You know, like, so in the world there exists men who can sit with pain and tears and vulnerability and anguish and not shut it down. That was like the world shifted on its axis for me at that point. And also there was a profound shift within me. So there's definitely very beautiful, very you know, powerful moments in my training. So, you know, there's always both sides.
Okay, and what would you say have been or has been one of your greatest challenges around Gestalt?
It's interesting. I see, I mean, myself in the Gestalt world, like I'm often challenging myself, you know, to go somewhere else, do a presentation, do a workshop, and then I would reflect, why am I putting myself out there to do something that is, again, so challenging? In a really positive way, it's always challenging. I mean, each time to sit with a client, in that uncertainty and unknown, there is a part of me that doesn't like that. And there's a part of me that knows to trust the process and the field. But then it's like, there is a moment, it was like, it would be so much easier if I could just tell this person what to do and they do it. And then they could be okay. There's a part, that's there. And so, it's a challenge each time. It's a beautiful challenge, each time. Other, less fun challenges was just the determination to stay through the training, and the disappointment of when the politics and power manipulations, become an important focus. And we're human,
Mm-hmm.
It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's that dark side of humanity that tends to happen. But
it is.
There is the lighter side, which I guess is the other question, if you're okay to move on to that, which would be, what are some of your greatest memories or your greatest experience in or around Gestalt somehow?
There are many. There are many. And like I said in the beginning, there's just those moments of real connection. When I was working with a client and there was just something that just clicked for them, that, aha, and you can just see the relief and the joy or the peace or whatever that comes over it. So this is particularly when I do, but even here, do therapeutic work in Japan. Being in a group, there's more intensity and more support, and being there, it's usually people, not always, who have done some training in Gestalt and experienced in Gestalt, so are more, willing to open. And, there are times in that context, especially with a group, that I just held this woman sobbing in my arms. And we did a whole process around, is it okay to cry? And me saying that I actually really love the eyes of people who cry. And she's like, what do you mean? And as she was wanting to cry and she's, pulling it back, and I'd worked with her several times, and she could just sort of see, in the room there was all these family history, relatives and ancestors, and saying, you're not allowed to cry. You can't cry. You just got to hold it all in. This was a Japanese lady, but of course, still experienced in lots of cultures. And I just said to her, so just look at the eyes of those people. And what do you see? Do you see alive, beautiful eyes, or what do you see? And she's like, see people who are fully living their lives. And she's like, no. And then I invited her to look around the room and see the eyes of people and ask them if they cried. And the eyes that were alive and bright and sparkling, each time she asked me, do you cry? And they're like, yes, I do. And the thing, and it's beautiful. And when it comes to my mind, this, in the workshop, the creativity and the, each time it's completely different. And there was, a lady who was feeling her own sadness of her inability to be caring to her own children. And in a very, it was only maybe 30, 40 minute piece of work in a group, to be able to connect with her at her own 6-year-old self. And at one point I'm next to her and we're pretending to be hiding under the covers, being scared of her parents fighting. And she allowed me to be there with her. And that changed everything. The fact that she wasn't there alone. And, you know, it sounds crazy if you just sort of talk about it, but people, you know, who work in this area know that those things make a difference. And so when people are open and trust me to be with them in those vulnerable, dark places, that's so beautiful. I'm honoured. So beautiful.
Well, I guess the last thing that I would ask is, what more do you want to do with this? What would you like to do yourself with Gestalt in the future, or where do you think that it's going, or where would you like it to go?
Yes. Well, so to me, I will be a Gestalt person, Gestaltist, my whole life. You know, that's because it's a way of life for me. I am excited and hopeful of more opportunities to travel and do workshops and work with people from different cultures. I find that so interesting and so exciting. So I have a lot of hope for continuing my work in Japan and, you know, different places. So I hope to do some writing. Gestalt as itself, like to think of how Gestalt training is placed in Australia now, and that kind of thing is not really very helpful at the moment. There's only 2 training institutes left, and different, you know, government restrictions and quite a blockage to the way the whole mental health area is organised here. This idea, because Gestalt therapists are called upon to continually grow, this is my opinion, my experience, that is vital for all of us. We all need to attend to our own stuff as we then, you know, move to be with other people attending to their stuff. That is absolutely vital, and I would love to see, you know, more of that, you know, encouraged across the board. You can't, that's something that I feel is really important. And as I was speaking to before, this idea of, you know, the dialogical, the relational, that Gestalt has the language and the background to really further develop that area. You know, wishful thinking was to see it helping, you know, communicate across cultures and bridging gaps and that kind of idealistic fantasies, maybe. But I believe Gestalt's got
Really
a lot to offer.
It would be really nice.
The way of, you know, it's essential to accept ourselves and be curious and gentle and aware with the other and find a place to connect. You know, on a micro level, that's wonderful. And you know, the more people are able and open to do that, the better. And honouring difference is a very big part of Gestalt. And growth. See, it's a verb.
It is. It is. Well, okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think just I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for all the opportunities that I have been given in my still very quite short career, because I only finished my training, I don't know, I've been seeing clients for about 6-7 years. So I feel that my whole life prepared me for where I am. And I'm just looking forward to more deep, rich connections. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. And this has been lots of fun. And even as we speak, I'm just thinking of my time in Mexico. Feels like a long time ago now, but it wasn't.
No, it was just a whole world ago. It was like before the apocalypse happened.
That's right. So yeah, just looking forward to more opportunities to be with people who want to grow and learn.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate meeting you again and effectively proving that, yes, I don't actually need to know where you are, and I don't feel like that matters. I appreciate you, and I can enjoy this connection. So thank you.
And it's lovely. And Gestalt, you know, that whole way of being, like we said, this enhances and enables beautiful connection between people. That's what we want. We all want to be seen and validated. Beautiful.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.